Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and welcome to our the OFS Insight event on delivering excellent technical education. I have been given one of these exciting Steve Jobs-esque wander around the stage mics, but I love a good lectern, so I'm gonna stick with this for a while. But my name is John Blake, and I'm the Director for Fair Access and Participation at the OFS. And I'm delighted to be your host and compere for this event today, because we're here with a fantastic range of panelists and wide range of guests, both in person and online, to discuss and centre the importance of technical higher education in the work of the OFS and also in the wider work of the higher education sector. So we all know that higher education in our country is vital to driving the economic success of the whole nation. It has the power to incubate in people the skills, knowledge and experiences that they need to achieve their ambitions, and that they can contribute to the wider economy and to its ongoing future. So we're here today to talk about technical higher education, those courses with an occupational focus, and how they can support people at all stages in their career and life to benefit from higher education. As I say, I'm delighted to be hosting this event because the power of technical higher education rests not just in the way it can support the economy, but also in the way it opens doors for all kinds of students, including those from disadvantaged and historically excluded backgrounds. You will hear today about the ways in which we can seek to grow excellent higher technical education. This is important not because it offers a route for other people's children to access higher education, but because it has the potential to offer the right route for all kinds of learners and to develop a brighter future. So today's agenda. First up, we are going to hear an opening address from the Chair of the Office for Students, Lord Wharton, and then we will hear a pre-recorded ministerial address from the Right Honourable Robert Halfon. And then we will have our first keynote address from Susan Lapworth, our Chief Executive. We'll then wrap up the first half of the morning with our panel discussion on the challenges and opportunities for the delivery of high-quality technical education, and then break for refreshments. In the second half, we'll start with a panel discussion on how we create enabling environments to support higher technical education, and then we will hear our second keynote speech, which I'm delighted to say will be given by the Baroness Wolfe of Dulwich. And then finally, I'll provide some closing remarks that will be much less insightful than any of the things you've heard up to that point. With no further ado, I'd like to ask the Chair of Office for Students, James Wharton. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, John, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to welcome you all to what is, in effect, the Office for Students feature-length Christmas special. We are delighted that you're joining us for this important event. And we are, of course, here to talk about and discuss a very important area and part of higher education, excellent technical higher education. Delighted as well that we're able to host this in this venue here at Code Node. This is a venue that describes itself as the UK's hub for all things tech, so it seems an appropriate location for our discussions today. I'd also like to welcome everyone who's joining us online. I think it's a great thing that we're able to now do these sorts of events, both in person and online, broadening the accessibility and the audience. And as John said, it will be made available afterwards for those who miss or perhaps miss here and want to catch up or follow any of the particular discussions that have taken place during the day. We're going to be exploring the roles of universities and colleges in delivering technical higher education. These are courses which equip students with the right skills to meet employment needs, and in so doing, they underpin local and national economies of the future. We'll also discuss the role of the OFS in regulating this area, as well as and alongside other regulatory bodies. It'll be a chance to hear a variety of perspectives from our speakers, and of course from those of you in the audience who are able and have come along to take part. From students, higher education providers, employers, and from us, the regulator, it rather reminds me of those words you don't want to hear. Hello, I'm from the Office for Students and I'm here to help you. Well, today we are here to help you, and I hope that the discussion and debate will be fruitful and worthwhile. Technical higher education, of course, covers a very broad range of courses. It covers also a broad range of ways of studying. These include employer-endorsed qualifications, so we're talking here about higher apprenticeships or degree apprenticeships, and higher technical qualifications. We're also talking about those degrees, undergraduate and postgraduate, that have specific occupations or employment routes in sight, such as engineering or teaching degrees. We're hosting this event at a time when there are lots of exciting developments in relation to building higher technical skills, with more higher technical qualifications on offer and the promise of a more flexible approach to study when the lifelong learning entitlement comes into force. I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing from our speakers and hearing from the comments and questions that you have to explore this very interesting and increasingly important topic. It gives me great pleasure to be able to welcome you here this morning. I have every faith that it will be an interesting discussion and a useful day. This is a subject area and subject matter which I have no doubt is going to become increasingly important as education and its interaction with the economy continue to rise up the agenda and to take an important part of the national debate and discussion. The roles that many of you play in that are key. The approach that we take as regulator and the role of the different bodies that interact to deliver the best possible quality technical higher education are more important than perhaps they have been for a very long time. So it's an important debate and discussion. I think that is reflected by the range of attendees that we have and the interest that has been shown in this event. I hope that you find it useful and worthwhile, and I look forward to continuing the debate and discussion, not just through today, but as we take these areas from our perspective as regulator and from your perspectives as those who are engaged in the education of higher technical qualifications. I look forward to continuing this debate forward and delivering the sorts of educational outcomes that are going to be needed for the economy of the future and for the jobs of the future for those who are securing them. So thank you very much for coming. It is my job, I think, John, do I hand back to you or do I hand back? I hand back to John, who will then hand over to the next stage in proceedings. Thank you very much.
Seamless there. Thank you very much, James. If this is indeed our feature-length Christmas special, then I'm delighted to introduce the next of our exciting cameos. Unfortunately, Robert Halfon was unable to join us in person this morning, but as the Minister of State for Skills, Apprenticeships and Higher Education, and as those of us who've been involved in education policy for a long time will know, a very long-standing advocate for the importance of technical and vocational education in creating opportunity for all students, especially those from a disadvantaged background. I'm delighted that the Minister has been able to share with us the following statement.
Hello everyone. I'm sorry I can't be with you today to talk about higher technical education. I've always believed that technical education can be higher in quality and delivery, and higher in student outcomes. I also want technical education to have higher prestige equal to that of academic learning. The enduring divide between further and higher education makes no sense. So it's great that we're now taking steps to eradicate it. The Office for Students is committed to helping us build the skills training the nation needs. Together, we are filling skills gaps and getting businesses to invest in their future workforce. But better technical education is not just a boost for industry and the economy, it's a boost for individuals, families and communities, helping people to climb the ladder of opportunity, rung by rung, to a good job and a great career. Social justice is a key pillar of the ladder, making sure that these opportunities reach those who need them most so they can improve their prospects. The other pillar that holds up the ladder is strengthening higher and further education. We are spending £3.8 billion on this over the current Parliament. This includes designing skills qualifications with employers so they have real value and utility on the shop floor. Higher technical qualifications are the second rung on the ladder of opportunity and championing the skills that employers need. Historically, there's been a low uptake of level 4 and 5 courses in the UK, sometimes called the missing middle of our skills system. We rank 6th in the G7 countries for the proportion of those adults whose highest post-school qualification sits at this level. Higher technical qualifications are fundamental to changing this. They are level 4 and 5 courses that have been approved against employer-developed standards. Only an approved qualification can call itself an HTQ and display the quality mark endorsement, giving both students and employers confidence that they provide the skills needed for the job in hand. This supports the third rung of the ladder of opportunity, making sure we have trusted, higher quality technical qualifications. HTQs in digital construction and health and science subjects already lead to jobs in sectors like cybersecurity, quantity surveying, and sports coaching. But we need to ensure that the high quality content is matched by high quality delivery. To help providers deliver the exceptional teaching these qualifications demand, we recently announced the second round of successful bids for our Skills Injection Fund. The first round enabled colleges like Barnet and Southgate to build a mock hospital ward for healthcare students and provided virtual reality technology for the University of Salford's HTQ courses. This is on top of the annual Strategic Priorities Grant for higher education teaching and related activities. This funding now includes £16 million specifically to support level 4 and 5 provision, prioritising HTQ courses. It shows that we consider technical education an integral part of university provision. As well as improving content and delivery, we are also tackling the artificial barriers between technical and academic options. From September this year, HTQ learners have been eligible for tuition fee and maintenance loans on the same basis as degree-level courses, and they can claim this support for full or part-time courses, allowing them to fit their studies around other commitments if needed. But there's more flexibility to come. HTQs will be among the first courses eligible for modular funding with the LLE, the Lifelong Learning Entitlement. The LLE, the fourth rung of the ladder of opportunity, is all about lifelong learning, which is so important for allowing people to move with the times and update their skills to fit today's jobs markets. The LLE will transform the student finance system. From 2025, it will provide a loan entitlement equivalent to 4 years of post-education, £37,000 in today's fees that people can use throughout their working lives to fund higher technical and degree-level learning. I think it's hard to overstate how much the LLE will change the further and higher education landscape and the tremendous opportunities it will bring students, providers and employers. Many learners need flexible access to post-18 education in order to fit it around work, family and personal commitments. The LLE will, for the first time, provide access to funding for high-value courses on a modular basis, starting with HTQs. People will be able to space out their studies and learn at a pace that is right for them. They may choose to build their qualifications over an extended period, studying one module at a time and moving between further and higher education providers. Like getting on and off a train, learners will be able to alight and board their post-school education when it suits them, rather than being confined to a single ticket. The Office for Students will regulate all providers offering LLE-funded provision, and we will support them to ensure that providers are fully aware of their requirements. To help accommodate smaller providers who major in level 4 and 5 provision, we have asked the OFS to develop a new third category of registration. In order to give this type of unregistered provider more time to prepare for OFS registration, we recently announced that we will extend the Advanced Learner Loan funding to 2027. We expect the OFS to consult on the new third registration category before the LLE launches in 2025. Good regulation of higher education is important. It protects students from poor outcomes, protects taxpayers' money, and helps to maintain the sector's reputation and success. We look forward to working with the OFS to ensure a proportionate regulatory approach for the LLE so that it can benefit as many people as possible. This wouldn't be a speech about higher technical education without me mentioning degree apprenticeships, two of my favourite words in the English language. They are part of the second rung of the ladder of opportunity, championing the apprenticeships that employers need, enabling students to climb to highly skilled, well-paid employment. I'm passionate about degree apprenticeships because they offer fantastic opportunities to students who perhaps couldn't afford to do a conventional degree. They offer the best of academic learning from world-leading universities and work-based training with some of Britain's best employers. Students earn a salary while they study and have no tuition fees to repay. On top of that, level 6 apprentices have median earnings of over 34,500 once they complete, demonstrating how valuable these workers are to employers. Degree-level apprenticeships have enjoyed year-on-year growth since their introduction and now make up 14% of all apprenticeships. But we need to diversify beyond the programmes that have fuelled expansion. That's why I've made £40 million available for degree apprenticeship growth in the next 2 years to get new courses off the ground and engage new candidates and businesses. I'd encourage anyone listening to consider these opportunities for your institution and the difference they could make to the next generation of your students. Everything I've talked about leads back to the ladder of opportunity. It's a way of thinking about what we need as a country to create a skill system that supports people of all backgrounds into secure and well-paid employment. Delivering excellent higher technical education will allow more people to study quality qualifications, gain sought-after skills, and reach the top of the ladder. A career with good progression and earning potential. This in turn will fuel the business expansion, the innovation we need and drive local and national economic growth. There is no downside to upskilling the nation. These are the aims that I think we all share for the country and for our students, and they can be achieved with your help by delivering excellent higher technical education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I say, I think those of us who've worked in education policy for a long time, and certainly those involved in higher and technical education, will be aware of the Minister's long-standing commitment. Again, I think his experience and understanding really shines through there of the whole system, albeit one hopes, for those of you who've travelled here today by train, that post-compulsory education is rather more efficient than Southern Railways. I think it's incredibly valuable to have that very clear statement of the ministerial and the government's vision for the power and importance of higher technical education. And I'm now delighted to welcome to the stage Susan Lapworth, the Chief Executive of the OFS, to explain how we see our role in this world. So, Susan.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all here and also online. And thank you for finding the time to join us today. I know it's a really busy time of the year. I imagine most of you will be familiar to some extent with the Office for Students, but for those who aren't, a few quick words of introduction. The OFS is the statutory regulator for higher education in England. We want every student to have a fulfilling experience of higher education that enriches their lives and careers. Our work has two main areas of focus. The first of these is quality and standards. So we think that all students should have a high-quality academic experience that broadens their knowledge and skills and equips them for whatever comes next. The second area of focus is equality of opportunity. That's about ensuring that all students, regardless of their background, can benefit from higher education. And for us, those two things, quality and equality, go hand in hand. We're not doing our job if students disadvantaged by their backgrounds are recruited onto poor quality courses with disappointing outcomes. As speakers have said, today we're focusing on technical higher education, and we use that term to mean those courses that are designed and delivered to students with particular employment or occupations in mind. And you can see how that focus of the discussion today brings together those two strategic priorities, quality and equality in the real world. So we're discussing how we can collectively make sure that technical higher education is high quality and accessible to students from all backgrounds. We've got lots of really interesting sessions to look forward to during the day, contributions from colleagues inside and beyond the sector. I'm particularly pleased to see colleges so well represented because they have such an important role to play in this area. But before we get to those conversations, I was going to say a bit more about the OFS's role here. But I wanted to start by saying that excellent technical higher education really matters. It matters to students, to employers, and to the economy. Excellent technical higher education means that students can feel confident that they'll qualify with the knowledge and skills that they're going to need for their chosen occupation. It means that employers know that future workforces will have the knowledge and skills that they're looking for to succeed. And it means that local and national economies are able to grow. And of course, it means that universities and colleges can continue to offer a fulfilling experience of higher education by delivering valuable courses to the widest range of students. So that's why it matters. But what's the OFS's role in all of this? We want to develop the capacity of the higher education sector to deliver those excellent technical courses. And we know that an important part of building that capacity is recognising the value that comes from the diversity of the higher education sector in England. We're constantly thinking about how our work can increase choice and opportunities for students. But choice isn't just about deciding between individual universities or colleges that deliver the same sort of higher education. It's about having a choice of the type of institution, the type of course, and how that course is delivered. So a truly diverse higher education sector is important because that range of choice that comes from diversity is in the interests of students. So we use our tools to support that diversity and to build capacity in different ways. And here, in this area in particular, our funding power is particularly important in stimulating that growth in technical higher education. The Minister talked a little about this a moment ago. We've increased our funding for level 4 and 5 courses this year. We've also launched a competition to increase the number of degree apprenticeships offered across England. And our funding continues to be particularly important to those universities and colleges delivering health-related courses. So, for instance, we continue to work really closely with NHS England and other parts of government to implement the recommendations in the NHS long-term workforce plan. So really important work for the country. 18 months or so ago, we began to fund a partnership between the Open University and further education colleges. So the OU is now working with colleges to validate new courses at level 4 and 5. This year, 7 more colleges joined that partnership, and we can see those partnerships leading to increased choice for students, greater uptake of higher education courses in areas of low participation in the country, and more courses that produce qualified workers who can meet those really local skills needs. So funding is really important for us in this area, but our other regulatory tools are important too. And I think that's about making sure that we're not making assumptions that a high quality course can only be one that's delivered over 3 years on campus to people fresh from school whose parents also went to university. So we set requirements for quality that properly recognise the nature of technical courses and how they're delivered. And we look at technical higher education through the lens of equality of opportunity. Again, those two strategic priorities coming together. One of the risks on our equality of opportunity risk register is the risk that there's a limited choice of courses and delivery modes, so students may not have equal opportunity to access a wide range of different types of higher education. And we think that matters because that particular risk could have a particular impact for some students. So for mature students, disabled students, those eligible for free school meals, or whose parents didn't experience higher education. And so we're asking universities and colleges to consider how they can address that risk in their access and participation plans by increasing the diversity and flexibility of their courses and thinking about the barriers for those particular students. And of course, we think higher technical education is a really important part of increasing diversity and flexibility in that way right across England. So the OFS's role continues to develop here. The next big shift, and we heard a little about that earlier, is the introduction of the lifelong learning entitlement, the LLE. That is a significant new policy. As Minister Health once said, the government has set out a real ambition for a more flexible, modular approach to learning and a new approach to delivering loans for students that will change the way that students and universities and colleges think about higher education. So the LLE has the potential to bring far-reaching change across the sector. And we think that inevitably has a significant impact on the delivery of technical higher education. So we might expect to see more growth in the delivery of occupation-focused knowledge and skills. So, for instance, through short bursts of learning funded by taxpayer loans. And we might expect that to open up opportunities to groups of students who don't typically access higher education at the moment. So important change. The LLE is bringing change for the OFS too. As you heard, we'll regulate all institutions offering courses funded through the LLE. And we've started to talk to the sector about how we might develop our regulation to respond to those changes. So we're currently looking at responses to a call for evidence that we published earlier in the year that asks how we should think about and how we should regulate outcomes for students studying on a modular basis. So what might count as a good outcome for a student studying flexibly over an extended period? And when do you measure that outcome if study is episodic? So do you measure after each module or at the end of a series of modules? And if so, which modules? And which institution gets the credit for those good outcomes if a student has studied across different institutions in the sector? We know that we need to work through these and other really tricky policy questions because what and how we regulate is going to have to change in this new environment. An early look at the responses to that call for evidence suggests really positively that institutions are thinking creatively about the possibilities and the benefits of the LLE, so really seeing it as an opportunity. But they're also telling us that they're worried about how they can show that connection between the study of individual modules and longer-term outcomes for students. And they think that that's going to be particularly tricky if more students start to transfer between higher education providers. So some real issues for us collectively to grapple with. I suspect we agree with some of those policy worries, and we'll have more to say about our thinking in those areas as we move through into 2024. The final thing I wanted to talk about today, and again that's been touched on already this morning, is the complexity in the regulatory and funding landscape for technical higher education. And as I go around the country visiting institutions and talking to colleagues delivering these courses, this is one of the things I often hear in those conversations, that the landscape is complex. And of course, they're right about that. There are lots of organisations working in this area: IFATE, Ofsted, Ofqual, ESFA, OFS, the collection of acronyms. We all have different roles and different expertise and knowledge. And that means it's particularly important for us all to work closely together, both to make sure that we're regulating effectively across the whole and to pool that expertise and that knowledge so that we can mobilise it for the greater good. We're doing that in practice. So at the OFS, we draw on Ofsted's reports about the quality of the courses that they inspect. And we've also worked with IFATE colleagues to make sure that they can rely on our regulatory judgments when they do that process of approving HTQs. And we're keen to do more here, and also to hear from universities and colleges about where they see unnecessary duplication that could be tackled. Because we do understand how frustrating that duplication can be, and we don't want it to get in the way of delivering for students. To wrap up then, the work that the sector does on technical higher education really matters. The introduction and expansion of new qualifications and the development of the LLE are bringing important opportunities for institutions right across England, and important opportunities for students too. At the OFS, we're keen to continue to work with the wide range of stakeholders in this area to build the sector's capacity to address skills shortages, to drive social mobility, and to improve local and national prosperity. The conversation we're all having today is part of that work, and I'm very keen and interested to hear from our range of speakers, and indeed from colleagues in the audience on these important issues. So look forward to the debate. Once again, thank you for joining us today. It's good to see you all, and I think I'm handing back to John.
Thank you very much, Susan. So we're now moving forward with our first panel discussion on what are the challenges and opportunities for the delivery of high-quality technical higher education. And this panel will be chaired by our Office for Students Student Experience Board member and chair of our student panel, Caleb Stevens. So if I can invite Caleb to the stage and give him the clicker of power, and he can introduce the panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the warm welcome. Today we're here to discuss our first conversation around what are the challenges and opportunities for the delivery of high-quality technical higher education. And I'm delighted to invite the following panel members to help facilitate this conversation. If I ask one at a time, if I could ask Professor Edward Peck from the Vice-Chancellor and President at Nottingham-Trent University, Nikki Davis, Principal and CEO at Leeds College of Building, Nathan Mould, Student Representative at Newcastle College University Centre, and finally Charlie Ball, Head of Labour Market Intelligence at JISC. Thank you for joining. So what we'll do is we'll go one at a time, and you'll have 2 minutes to answer the first question before we open up to questions both in person and online. I think if I start from over there, if that's okay. So I'll start with Nikki Davis, and I'll just repeat the questions. So what are the challenges and opportunities for the delivery of high-quality technical higher education? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to sort of endorse, really, the opportunities that technical education provides. And I'll put it into the context of my institution. So Leeds College of Building, we're a general further education college, but all we focus on is construction and the built environment. And we have about 4,500 students in Leeds. The vast majority of those are apprentices, and we have a range of apprentices at all levels. We have about 800 higher end degree apprentices as well. And the opportunities that technical education gives to our students are significant. We have 41% of our students in our full-time programs come from the lowest decile of deprivation in the city. And our average salary for our apprentices when they leave is 30,000. So those students who can access the opportunities all the way through the construction, as that's what we do, the opportunities are really significant to be life-changing for some students. And we see students become the first in their families to go on to get degree apprentices, and then progress into construction, which is obviously a very well-paid and productive career, with lots of skill shortages, so lots of opportunities at the moment. The biggest challenge for us is that we don't have the staff to deliver it. We aren't funded enough to be able to meet demand, and the competition for recruitment of those qualified people to deliver is vast. We're not only competing with fellow colleges, but universities, but also employment. If I look at our quantity surveying degree apprenticeship at the moment, we started with a pilot of 9, that went to 100 in its second year. So the demand for those roles is significant, but we can't recruit a quantity surveyor because their salary is so in excess of what we can get close to by significant amounts. And when the demand for those roles is that fierce in the industry, coming into teaching is not an option, particularly in a cost of living crisis. And I think some people see teaching as the easier option, and it very much isn't. It's a profession on its own, and we want the best staff to deliver. And because we want those really good outcomes for our students, but we can only do that with the proper funding for FE colleges.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Edward Peck.
Thank you. So I want to talk about demand and the lifelong learning entitlement. And of course, people often talk about the LLE as though it's just about modular provision. Of course, it's about all funding of all students' higher education. Let's just think about this modular approach and the demand opportunities I see it, and give a practical example of how I think it's going to work out. And it's based in Mansfield, which actually picks up Robert's point that it has one of the highest percentages of people in the country whose highest qualification is a level 3 qualification. And it's done in partnership with Vision West Notts College. And the key part about that partnership is that we do all level 4 and above, and they do all level 3 and below. And that's how the division of labour is carved up in Mansfield. So we have 4 engineering courses, HNCs, HNDs. We have 59 students this year, 38 are mature, and 1 came in with A-levels. The rest come with a whole range of qualifications, and some come in with recognised work experience, which tells you something about the mix of students on that course. 17 are apprentices who come to us through the Vision West Notts College apprenticeship scheme, but we teach them in the classroom. We have other students who are accessing SLE funding. Some employers are paying the costs, and for some they self-fund. So a real mix of students already on these HNC, HNDs. Delivered locally on the college site, which is really important, 1 or 2 days a week, depending on part-time or full-time students. And of course, they've been designed in collaboration with local employers. And exactly the sorts of jobs these people are going to go into when they get their HNC or HND. And we use those titles because engineering companies know what an HNC and HND is. They remember them from the old days. They really like the qualifications. Now, very shortly, those courses will become HTQs, eligible for LLE funding, and we're going to design and deliver them on a modular basis. In fact, they're already based on modules. And because we have so many students already in play, modularly taught, the transition costs to the LLE are actually very low, because in a way, all we're going to do is have a new funding route. And we've agreed with Pearson's that we're going to have a license to design and accredit those modules in the way that we wish to, locally, rather than go through a national scheme, which is really, really important. So we anticipate lots of demand for modular LLE-funded provision, but we can't guarantee it. But in a sense, we're not concerned about that because we have this pipeline of skills education already in play. And we think that some employers will switch away from apprenticeships and put more of their employees through the LLE, or they might fund themselves. Some of the self-funders might actually access LLE. And we think there's a whole load of folk who've got level 3 qualifications or great experience who will come through and just do individual modules because they can see the employment route at a local level. So for us, that's a practical example of how you get the LLE on a modular level going. We know the demand's there, we can see the opportunity, and we're just going to build on it. And I hope that gives you a practical example of how this is going to work when we get to 2025.
Thank you. And Nathan Mull.
Just so give you a bit of a background of my education, I initially went through quite a traditional route through education, doing my A-levels, and then going on to study maths and physics at uni with looking to go into engineering. And I just found it wasn't the right thing for me and ended up leaving, and then went back into education at Newcastle College, doing my mechanical engineering, level 5, and now my level 6. I think the major challenge for delivering high-quality higher technical education for me has been that high quality means different things to different people. I think for me, university didn't feel like a high-quality education because it wasn't the right thing for me. even though I know it was a high quality education for many of the people that were on the course with me. I think going to Newcastle College, I feel like I've had a really high quality education there because it was the right type of education for me, and that's helped me prosper and go on and do some great things. I think that really comes down to the awareness of it. I think when I was going through my A-levels, I didn't have any real awareness that there was the opportunities for really good, high-quality technical education out there. I wasn't to the point where I really didn't even know anything about it. I think that also comes down to exposure as well. I think there's a lot of opportunities for exposing students to higher technical education while they're in high school and while they're in their A-levels, just to show them that it can be the right type of education for them. I think there's some really good opportunities now because the views on technical education are changing. I think people are seeing it on the same level as going to uni. With the government introducing the T-levels as well, that's given people more exposure to it at an earlier level, so they can get a feel for it and find out if it's the right type of education for them. I also think with there being a massive skills gap in industry and them pouring more money into it, that's creating a big pull into higher technical education, which is creating some great opportunities as well. I think, all in all, there's some amazing opportunities out there for getting more people into the high-quality technical education that is already out there, and I'm really optimistic about that.
Thank you. And Charlie Bull.
Well, I'm your duly designated labour market nerd, so rather than do practical examples, I'm going to give you abstract stats. But I'm going to try to ground that in the lived experiences of people and individuals and of institutions. The demand is clearly here, and the opportunities are immense. The Unit for Future Skills estimates that we're going to need about 1.9 million STEM professionals, extra STEM professionals by 2035, or to put it in realistic terms, 190,000 people year on year entering the STEM labour market. Last year, just to put that into perspective, we fell short, even though the labour market was in a pretty decent situation, and we had widespread occupational shortages. We added about 175,000 people to those occupations. So we need to do more to bring people into these roles. But there are a lot of barriers in place. One of the most crucial is, as Nikki mentioned, is we simply don't have the staff to do the training. It's interesting that she mentioned quantity surveying. The gold standard piece of work for examining skills and occupational shortages is the Department for Education's Employer Skills Survey. Unfortunately, that was suspended during COVID. It normally happens every 2 years. We've recently received our first ESS for 5 years at the end of October. More data will be available in January. But every year, or every iteration of the ESS shows that the single most in demand or most serious shortage role in the UK is quantity surveying. We train about the third the number of quantity surveyors every year in the UK that we need, and we have done for many years. It's a well-known shortage. We've known all about it for a long time, and very little has been done to address it. And fundamentally, the issues are because we've got such a shortage of quantity surveyors, that qualified quantity surveyors can earn a lot of money quantity surveying and not training people to do quantity surveying. And so it's very difficult, particularly for colleges, to find people who can do that training. It's a problem across the whole of technical education, particularly in engineering, particularly in IT. And so it's not just a question of parity of esteem between technical and academic routes. There needs to be a parity of esteem between training, between people offering training and people entering industry. And that parity of esteem can only really, in a cost of living crisis, be expressed in terms of salary. There is no easy way around this. There needs to be a lot more money injected into the system for colleges, for institutions, for universities. You can find me a UK university that has enough engineering engineering professors, I will shake your hand and say, well done, because there are not very many of them. Well, I mean, we don't all have the pull that Edward has, and the charm and ability to bring people in. But I'm sure you wouldn't mind a few more applicants.
I wouldn't mind a few.
Okay,
fair enough.
But in general, we're short of people who are able to train. The other side, from the point of view of the data, is it's clear that we have substantial demand, but sometimes the data is quite difficult to parse. Sometimes the supply side, those of us who represent the supply side, and those of us who and those people who work on the demand side of things speak somewhat different languages. We have different understandings of what skills mean and what qualified means, and so it can sometimes be difficult. My original background is in the hard sciences. My doctorate is in analytical chemistry, 4-sector tandem mass spectrometry of cyclodextrins in the gas phase. Thank you for asking. And so it makes it quite, and from that side of things, and having worked for a long, long time from the demand side in sciences, sometimes we're quite imprecise in what we say. Yes, there is demand for STEM professionals, but not all STEM qualifications are in demand at the moment. I'm not going to go down the invidious route of saying we've got rather more X, Y, Zs than we need and not enough of ABCs. I'm an analytical chemist. We don't have enough analytical chemists in the UK, but our historic strength, and our links to the pharmaceutical industry, for example, mean that we produce a large number of world-class synthetic organic chemists. We don't need all those synthetic organic chemists in the UK. We need a lot of other chemists. And when we say we need STEM professionals, sometimes we mislead young people and older workers who might be training into thinking that all of these qualifications, no matter how good, are in equal demand. We need to be much clearer when we say, actually, sometimes and in some parts of the country, we're going to need more electrical engineers. Down in the southwest, with the defence industry, for example, we may need more mechanical or even naval engineers. We may need more people in particular forms of IT in different parts of the country. And the Shadbolt Review in 2017 found that some of the imprecision of language in terms of the way that we phrase demand means that people are taking qualifications that are not necessarily ideal for them. And so we want to be a lot more careful in the way that we phrase the notion of demand for technical education. Yes, we have a demand in bulk for it, but sometimes in some areas, some things are in more demand than others.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel members for answering the question. And we're going to open up now to people for questions, both in person and hybrid. And we've got a colleague who will be also reading out those who are going to be asking virtually. We have a mic that's going to be wandering around for anyone who has any questions. So I will now open up to the floor. Is there anybody who has any questions? Please.
Thank you very much. That was really helpful answers to the question posed. I've got a question for Edward Peck, if that's okay. We're like you, similar. I work from an academy, a fashion retail academy, and I'm just at the moment looking to redevelop and redesign our curriculum provision and wise to get ready really for LLE. I was wondering what size credits you work on and what, because nothing officially has been told. I have heard the word 30 credits, but I'd like to know as a wisdom now to get ready for that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have to work on 30 credits for the LLE. And in fact, our regular design as an institution tends to use 30 credits. We are looking at micro-credentials, though, and how we accredit those and how we bundle them together to get up to 30, if they're 310s, to access LLE funding. That's our starting position. One thing, just come back to Charlie's bit. We're very specific, actually, what we need in Mansfield. Some of the things, I don't know what they are. Finite element analysis and programmable logic controllers. I don't know what they are, But I'm absolutely clear that's what these modules will be about. They're absolutely tuned in to the local employer's requests, which is why they're so specific. And of course, one of my slightly unpopular views is I think higher education is university business. And one of the things we've done with Vision West Notts College is when we took over all the Level 4, we tupied their staff across to the university on different terms and conditions. And it's meant we can actually recruit and retain people who want to teach these very specific engineering and IT type programs. I think there are many reasons why FE colleges focus on Level 3 and around, and university Level 4 and above. And that's just one of them. And I believe it quite strongly. The other thing I'd say is that local skills improvement plans have somehow got completely focused on Level 3 and below. And of course, in our part of the world, that's not the problem. We've got lots of people Level 3. We need the LSIP to do with Level 4 and above, and that's rather got lost. And I think that would be really helpful to get more pressure, I think, into the system. Fundamentally, we have to sort out our relationship with FE as universities. Now, whether it's the relationship we have with Vision West Notts, it won't work for everyone, but you've got to know what the pipeline is and what the opportunity to share funding and share students looks like to make some of this provision really viable, particularly in the early stages.
Thank you. Any more questions in person?
Thank you. And yes, fascinating from all the panel. What I wanted to ask is a gentleman in the middle that you talked about in your talk about how when you were at school, you didn't necessarily get all the information that you needed to make the right choices for you. Mm-hmm. What does the panel think about how we make sure that schools and colleges get high-quality IAG, about degree apprenticeships, about demand, the right ones that students should be applying for, and who's responsible for this?
Thank you. I'll open up.
Well, my role is very specifically to support careers professionals. And there are a group of issues here. Firstly, the outside of HE fragmentation, there's a significant fragmentation of careers provision, and most people working with school-age learners do feel that there are difficulties and barriers to providing good quality careers and guidance. Part of the issue is that the information available is quite opaque and changes quite rapidly. It's quite hard to resource proper information, advice and guidance. And many schools have to rely on external providers or external partners in order to deliver that, who do their best, but are sometimes not always completely au fait with the individual specifics of an individual institution. And I go into work with schools quite a bit. One of the counterintuitive things about talking to young people about the kind of routes that Nathan has taken is that sometimes you need to reassure them that going down a particular route will not lock them into that for the rest of their lives. So, for example, I work quite a bit in the Black Country, in Wolverhampton and Walsall with schools in there. And their legacy is of heavy industry, which has largely left. And so when I first started doing this, I got told very explicitly, don't tell these kids that they should study engineering, college and university, because their dads did. They lost their jobs. And you have to bring them into these areas and these ideas gently. And the way to do it is to say, actually, if you go to college and study an engineering course, technical engineering course, you don't have to do that the rest of your life. It'll provide you with a suite of tools that allows you to go into those areas. But also, if you choose, or if that job falls away, or if the opportunities change, you will be able to adapt. And this is the sort of message that we need to get across to young people and to people like Nathan, to say, actually, there are a suite of opportunities available to you. University might be one, college might be another, but they don't lock you into a particular pathway permanently. And one of the strengths, one of the international strengths of the UK education system is that we've got a system that allows you to vary a little bit. And obviously, if you're employer funded, They would quite like you to do the thing they funded you to do. The dirty secret is you don't actually have to. And that can be a message that can be actually quite powerful to young people making choices at the start of their lives, that they are not locking themselves and committing themselves to a pathway forever.
Thank you. I'd like to pass to Nikki, please.
Yeah, I think careers education is a fundamental part. The biggest driver of careers education is parents, and the landscape is very confusing for parents. And every parent wants their young person to go into a well-paid career. They want to know that that job's there for however many years they may be in employment, and it's recognising that point that actually you don't go into a job for life anymore. That's a security blanket that you have, but it's those transferable skills that are needed to progress through. So I think making the education and careers landscape easier to navigate for parents is a fundamental part. We seem to be lacking a careers strategy nationally, and locally. Everybody is trying to do their best, but they're doing it in silos. So in West Yorkshire, we now have the Combined Authority who are pulling careers education together, so that there is that clarity that goes to parents and to young people, because the vast array of careers out there are significant. You're not going to understand all of the roles that were talked about. How could you? Yeah. But it has to be seen in a much wider context as well, because the GCSE curriculum is extremely academic, and it drives students in a certain way. So if we're serious about opening up technical education, yes, you have to have careers education, but you actually have to have the Key Stage 3 and 4 curriculum that leads up to it as well, that shares it. I'm also going to take the opportunity to go back against what Edward said, because it would be remiss of me not to. So, and as Nathan has said as well, university is not for everyone, but it absolutely has a role to play. And by saying that university business is level 4, 5, 6, that to me sounds like it's okay to underfund FE, and to have the salary the difference between the two institutions. In our college, you can go from an entry-level qualification in plumbing through to a BSc degree apprenticeship, building services engineering apprenticeship, and that's life-changing for some people. And we have the benefit of technical expertise. Every one of our tutors is an expert in their subject, as I'm sure they are in universities, and we have the ability to teach students in much smaller groups, and have the benefits of direct employer engagement that has, through the apprenticeship route, the social mobility angle of it is significant. I absolutely think that universities and FE colleges need to collaborate more to make the landscape easier. But absolutely, it's our business as well.
Thank you. Before I pass to the next question, I'm just going to check if any of our other panel members would like to just contribute to this bit.
Yeah, I was actually going to say I agree with Nikki, what Nikki said about high school kind of not having anything to prepare you for technical education, no real experience of technical education, and the little that it does have, it's not encouraged. I mean, resistant materials, which was about as close as we got to engineering at high school. When my sister tried to go into it, she was actually discouraged from doing it. She was actually told it was for lower academically achieving students, which I mean is a real shame. And luckily, she went on to do it anyway. But
Good.
but it was a bit. It was really shocking to hear that, and then it just kind of gives the impression that it's not on the same level as universities. It's that I think it's important to get it in teachers' minds as well as parents' minds, as to just that it is on an equal footing, and it really can give you the same opportunities for progressing.
Thank you.
Can I just make one very quick point
Absolutely.
there? I mean, fundamentally, skills, information, advice and guidance shouldn't be left to teachers who have their own extremely challenging roles to cover. And often, let's be honest, a lot of teachers have come straight from university or college or training and into schools. And schools should have access to properly trained career specialists. It is a trained profession. It is a proper occupation. It should be treated more seriously. And as Nikki says, we really could do with a national career strategy.
Thank you. I think we have one final question in person, and then we'll go online.
Thanks very much. Johnny Rich from the Engineering Professors Council, and among other places. I'm nervous about sounding unnecessarily cynical here, but because genuinely I think we all would applaud the efforts to address the supply side of higher technical qualifications and filling the skills needs from the supply side. But I'm not seeing in engineering a massive number of students wanting to do engineering who are not able to get places on a course somewhere, albeit not a level 6 degree. And so what about anything that's changing will address the student demand need? Why will a student suddenly want to do the courses that not even Edward Peck knows what they mean? I mean, and if he doesn't know, then no one does.
I'm not an engineer.
Picking up on the Careers IAG point, how are people supposed to know that these courses exist? How are they supposed to want to do them? Because, you know, they're not falling over themselves to become quantity surveyors or engineers or to fill many of these other skills needs.
Thank you. Who'd like to start?
It's people seeing where the jobs are, and I assume that being a finite element analyst or a programmable logic controller means it has something to do with the fact that Mansfield's on the M1, it has DHL, it has Amazon. These are things to do with how you run an automated distribution center. And what the companies want is people who could know how to fix the line when it goes down. I assume that's what this is about, and it's more sophisticated than that, but fundamentally it's that, and they can't get them. And so what people will see, either because they work for those companies already, or because they start to see the opportunities, oh, hang on a minute, they can't recruit those people. They'll start to be working somewhere else. They'll start to take these modules because the skills absolutely connect with the jobs they're seeing advertised in the local papers because their vacancies are there and they're there now. My other example is green retrofit construction workers. We launched a course quite speculatively, level 4, HNC in green retrofit, thinking, well, just see what happens. Again, modular, 2 days a week, you can work around your other job. We got about 30 students in the first intake from a standing start because people recognize there's jobs and their employers who need green retrofit skills. There ain't no point talking about changing all your boilers from gas to whatever else you might want to put in if no one can do it. So I think people are actually quite smart, and employers are quite smart, seeing gaps in the market, and they want the provision. And I think much of this will be supply-led, and it has to be really local. So I'm talking about a population of about 250,000 in Mansfield and Ashfield. It's that local. And if it's that local, it's in the local college, it's a place they're used to going, they know it, they're going to go, they'll feel comfortable there, it's going to work. So I may disagree with, I think, Nikki, about some of the ways you do this, but the FE relationship has got to be sorted out, because it's got to be where the people want to go. It'd be pointless trying to run that in Nottingham on our city campus, because people wouldn't come.
Thank you. Well, now...
can I...
absolutely.
I would never waste the opportunity to answer one of Johnny's questions. Fundamentally, the issue is that we simply don't have enough people studying engineering, and we haven't for many years. And actually, we're far from the only advanced economy that doesn't have enough people studying engineering. So, you know, you're absolutely right. From the demand side, we are not short of places for students, with sort of students who want to study engineering. And to be honest, we all have a job to sell engineering as a career. From my point of view, as a labour market specialist, you know, I look at engineering, I think, well, this is an in-demand, secure, well-paid job. What a nightmare. Of course people don't want to do that. But actually, when you talk to students, they see it as difficult, technically demanding, often a little bit dull. Sorry, Johnny. But sometimes a little bit dull. So I think we all need to do a job to explain to people how these roles are important, necessary, vital, and interesting.
But Johnny, I think we're looking in the wrong place. 38 of the people on those HNCs, HNDs are mature.
Yes.
And I suspect a large majority never went to university at 18. And what the LLE will do is redefine what it means to go to university.
Well, we've also got the issue, as I mentioned, from working with students in the Midlands, is that some people from non-traditional HE backgrounds associate engineering with industries that have gone, and with job loss. My family, a lot of my family are from Mid Cheshire, from Crewe in particular, which used to be the centre of heavy engineering. It's all gone now. My family, you go way back. They work for Foden's, the big manufacturers out there, and in lots of parts of the country, engineering is associated with industrial decline. And we have to make it clear that engineering is a job for the future, not a legacy job that's something that we used to do and used to do well, but now, large parts of the West Midlands and my home areas of the Northwest, and Scotland and South Wales associate it with. It doesn't necessarily have the best image, and so we do need to do some work on that kind of image, particularly for the sort of students that Edward deals with.
Thank you. We're now going to pass on to our virtual members. Is there any questions that anyone's posed, Al?
Yes, there are, thank you. First of all, question directly to you, Nathan. You changed your direction for higher education. What can the sector do to make more young people aware of the choices available to them, especially higher technical education? If there was a magic wand, what would you do with it?
In terms of making, I think it really does come down to making people more aware of it, and I think that what the issue was, I just didn't feel like there was any other path. It was very single track. There was everyone was doing their UCAS applications, and you kind of get almost like carried along with the flow of it. I think exposure to it early on and giving people, like Nikki was saying, a bit more of experience of it during their time at high school would really give people the opportunity to see the values in it. I think it would also increase the amount of people who are coming into engineering, because you'd end up giving them that exposure to it early on so that they can see if it's the right thing for them. Whereas I think when people don't have that exposure to it, they're not seeing it as an opportunity. They're also seeing that going to uni is going to give them the best opportunities for income and earnings, whereas there's a lot of opportunity for progressing in engineering to get wherever you want to be, really. So I think giving them the exposure to it and putting it on the pedestal it really deserves, and showing people what you can actually achieve in engineering is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Another question. As mentioned, the landscape of education is increasingly complex. Whilst it opens more options to learners, what would you consider to be the draw towards classroom-based higher technical education like HTQs, as opposed to an apprenticeship route which provides a wage while studying?
Thank you. Professor Peck?
Yeah, so I think there are some issues about completion rates, aren't there, around apprenticeships, which often I don't think get quite enough attention. And some of that's about their sheer length of time it takes to fulfill them. Also, sometimes people don't do the endpoint assessment. I think they're going to tighten up the rules around that, which they need to, because otherwise completion rates, if we had those in higher education, I think Susan had something to say about it. And I think some employers will start to move away, as will their employees, from that set piece, maybe 3-5-year apprenticeship, towards a more flexible way of learning, where you can do modular provision, which, let's face it, will be, not always, but largely classroom-based, and you can take an extended period of time to do it while you're working in the company which employs you. So I think there'll be much more of a view of, well, does it have to be an apprenticeship, or could it be done through an HTQ on a modular basis over a period of time? So I think that's where some of the demand will come from. And I've heard some major employers like Transport for London talk about that to me and say, this is where we're going to go with this when we can. Really open up, I think, opportunities for a lot more people to change what they want to do, to go from being a train driver to being an HR specialist. And it's that kind of thing, I think, will start to happen much more commonly.
Thank you. Al, I think we have time for just one more question.
Continuing on the theme of the LLE, demand for and the cost of modular study could be a challenge. Does the panel think modular courses will be popular? And if so, does the panel think they'll be more expensive to run than a traditional programme?
Thank you. I think I'll pass to Nikki first.
Yeah, I do think there will be demand for the modular approach because people's lives are complicated, and that ability to access provision when you want it and where you want it, I think will be really important to people. And you use the example of retrofit. If you look at the workforce for retrofitting this country's housing stock, it's already out there. It isn't new people. So those people who are in the workforce need to access the right training at the right place. I do think there's an issue still around people managing full-time jobs and studies and the cost sometimes and a lack of willingness to take loans for that education. But I think that's something that can be overcome. But I do think it's as you say, apprenticeships are quite long in duration, and some of the issues around endpoint assessments are systemic. They aren't, it's in the design of the system. And I think the LLE will give people that flexibility of choice, and particularly employers as well, to access provision.
Thank you. Charlie?
One of the things that modular provision and micro-credentialing also allow is employers to really tweak their provision to fill specialist and niche roles, such as the ones that Edward cited. And I'm someone who actually works on the occupational classification system. I don't know what those jobs are either. So it is quite difficult. But when you're in a large technical organisation, say a big IT firm, you will have a lot of very specialist, subtly different roles that you will need filling. And so the opportunity to offer modular training and modular skills provision in those areas will help to tweak some of those issues that we have with the more niche demand for skills. And I think they will become quite popular. And I think they're particularly well suited to adult learning and for existing workers and for people with experience to help modify and build upon their own experiences to reach those specialist roles that will be that exist now and will be available in the future. They also allow a certain amount of flexibility to anticipate future demand in things like, for example, the green industries, where we know there are likely to be emerging technologies or areas to do with AI, for example, where we know jobs will become available, and to use the cliche, which I first heard many years ago, for those jobs that we don't have names for yet, this form of provision will help to route demand in that direction.
Yeah, just picking back up on the original question as well, the complexity and the efficiency and being able to offer these qualifications is going to be very tricky because of that issue of not knowing what the demand is going to be. So capacity building in the system is going to be really important. So the funding that's almost there to to stimulate demand and to make sure that it can be accessed, because what we don't want is providers not being able to offer the LLE in the areas that people want in the first few years as it develops.
I guess that's my point, Nikki. If you're starting from scratch, you probably shouldn't do it. If you haven't already got a pipeline of employers and learners come through other routes, then just offering an LLE as a standing module will probably fail.
Yeah,
that's right. And the administrative and regulatory costs are going to be quite high. Yeah. And in particular, if you haven't got a good, well-established record system and an administrative system, it's going to be pretty hard to develop one from a standing start.
Yeah. Well, the EFSA teach you that, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to our panel members. I'm just going to summarise following, and I've tried my best to capture as much as I can. I think it's been quite insightful to hear the different aspects with regards to our question, from both the funding of employers, trying to find staff to teach these courses, but also looking at the different definitions of what high quality means to different organisations and institutions. I think that we've heard as well about one aspect is around that accessibility of knowledge, both for primary caregivers, for their children who might be accessing in the future technical higher education, but also the relationship between further education colleges, but also across the education sector, including secondary education. We've heard about some ideas around the need for national career strategy and looking at a way in which we can communicate all of this so that local demand, but also from a national perspective, that the right courses are being taught and at a high quality level. And also looking at within both local and national that legacies, whether it's engineering or other different areas, are not restricted in getting future students to be studying. I'd like to thank the panel members for joining us. Nikki Davis, the Principal and CEO at Leeds College of Building. We have Professor Edward Peck, Vice-Chancellor and President of Nottingham-Trent University. Nathan Mould, Student Representative at Newcastle College University Centre. And Charlie Bull, Head of Labour Market Intelligence at JISC. If you please put our hands together to thank our panel members. Thank you all. I'll now be passing back to John. Yes.
You don't have to wait on the stage.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone, and particular thanks to Edward for... It's very rare to be the regulator at a conference with your regulators where someone else says something that makes them the most unpopular person in the room, so that's really handy. Thanks very much. I think before we conclude that, I think I just as it would always be remiss to get a speech from Robert Halfon in which he doesn't mention the words degree apprenticeship, so I would think it would be remiss of me to miss any opportunity to talk about cross-phase working and the importance of schools, because I think what came through really powerfully there is that this is not a problem that can be solved in HE alone or indeed in FE alone. And particularly, Charlie talked about parity of esteem and the way in which that's manifested. If I had I've been involved in education policy for 15 years, and if I had £1 for every time the words parity of esteem had been used very casually, I'd have, I was going to say better suit, I'd have a suit to be wearing here today. Because it's not a thing that's in our rhetorical gift. People will assert it and they will say we will have parity of esteem, but it does often come back to for other people's children. And I think what's so powerful about where we are at the moment is that we're talking about what that means in real terms, and I think particularly the importance of genuinely strong professional outcomes for people from that work. But I think also what came through is that in order to build the agency for young people to make those choices, we need a much greater focus on work discovery much younger. It is simply the case, as Nikki says, that the job market, if it was ever simple enough to understand in one afternoon being told it by your form tutor, certainly isn't anymore, and we need people to be out there understanding what's involved in that. And as someone who used to be I used to be the teacher responsible for doing work experience, often children went on work experience for 2 weeks, and what they learned was that it's very, very boring working in a shop. Which may or may not be a very useful thing to learn at some point in your life. It doesn't really tell you very much about what your options are as you go into the future. So I think that the point and power of doing that. I would say, though, and I think this is where it's a really fascinating balance about how HE, FE and schools talk about this, is that although there must be scope for those conversations in schools, the fundamental transferable skills are literacy and numeracy. And I think one of the greatest barriers to engineering is not simply the reputation of engineering, it's the quality of mathematics that students get. And I think the most devastating thing we heard in that panel was Nathan's comment that students were being told that things that were with your hands were to be done by those who were academically less successful. And fundamentally, the work that I've put in since I joined the OFS on encouraging higher education to work with, not work at or to, schools is to ensure that the quality of learning across the curriculum is stronger. Fundamentally, we will never solve the equality barriers we face in HE if we don't see greater knowledge and skill development for all students, particularly the most disadvantaged in early years. And I do think that's absolutely essential. But teachers can't do that alone. As Charlie says, teachers don't know the market. When I was a teacher, someone asked me how they got a job with Goldman Sachs. I don't know, I'd apply if I were you, was probably not what they were looking for in terms of help. Yeah. Yes, I mean, please don't comment further on potentially libelous comments about Goldman Sachs. Thank you. And the final point I make is that this is the honest truth is that this country has never had this conversation particularly successfully. We've never developed the skills strategy across many decades that we wanted. But I do feel that we are closer now, and these conversations are being had between the sectors with a far greater openness and sense of transparency. And that sense of the importance of the demand of technical skills across the economy is really important. I think one of my favourite visits that I've been on so far was to the Academy of Life Technology, in which students are being trained how to do all of the many technical things that we can see around us today. And the essential point of understanding that there is a breadth of jobs out there that are not just traditional engineering jobs, but are across the economy, indeed in the creative world as well. I was also shown the thing where you can get a thing called the toaster, which makes you jump out of the stage and appear there. And I did ask for it for today, but I was told we were not allowed to have that. So I am slightly disappointed. Right, it's break time now, which you'll be delighted about. So thank you all very much thus far for your insightful discussion and your questions. We're going to have a 20-minute break. It's 22 minutes. You can find tea and coffee on the lower ground floor. And I look forward to seeing everyone for the second half of our day in 20 minutes. Thank you very much. So we are back. Thank you very much. Very efficient timing. So we heard from our earlier panel about where technical higher education could take us, and we wanted to spend our second panel discussion looking at how we establish the environment to take us there. We know that there are a lot of different regulators and funders at work in this space, as Susan referenced earlier, a cloud of acronyms, but if you can get an 8-letter word out of it, you get a whole 50 extra points. So we want to use it. Thank you, John. So laugh there. We want to use our time now to think about how we can develop the system for providers and students so that it works for them. And as Susan mentioned in her speech, the different players do bring different skills and experience to bear in this area, and the decisions on how that framework is established are quite rightly ones for government. But we are interested in how we at the OFS shape our approach to ensure that we deliver the environment in which excellent technical higher education can flourish. So let me, I can look over there, can't I? So how do we create an enabling environment to support technical higher education? So joining us for this panel are, to my left, Lewis Cooper, the Director of the Independent Commission on the College of the Future, John Cope, the Executive Director of Strategy for UCAS. UCAS, it doesn't stand for anything anymore, it's just UCAS now, are you?
University College Mission Service.
It is still that. You're not just like a single word anymore. And then, but also, of course, the doorway for increasing applications for apprenticeships. Jack Smith, who is OFS's Head of Pathways and Funding Policy. Dr. Mandy Crawford-Lee, the CEO of the University Vocational Awards Council. And online, I hope, is Chiara Cavaglia, a research economist from the London School of Economics. So I'm going to ask each panellist in turn to respond to the formative questions. I'm going to ask you to take about 2 minutes in your initial responses, and then we will take questions from the audience here and online. So I'm going to start in the order I have here, which starts with Chiara, if that's all right, Chiara.
Yep. Okay, yes, thank you. And sorry for not being there. I just said that in my 2-minute talk, I will mainly focus on degree apprenticeships or higher level apprenticeships because this is basically the focus of my research. And I should say that degree apprenticeships are becoming quite popular and quite appealing to students. So a big issue in terms of participation is actually the fact that there are not enough places for students. And the other main issue is that access is not equal. So these apprenticeships are quite competitive, and at least between 2015 and 2020, which is the period that we were looking at, that we were researching on, degree apprentices were mainly 25 years old or older. They were mainly people living in the richest areas, and there were mainly people with an academic background, and mainly students with very top prior attainment, which is basically what one could think if one thinks about access to university, but not necessarily what one would think of an apprenticeship, which should be or could be a tool to promote social mobility and to reduce inequality. So I think that there could be things that could be done to increase and to promote a more kind of equal access at the school level. So at the learner's level, for example, there might be, as it was also mentioned in the panel this morning, higher exposure or better advice, career guidance, but also like direct help, for example, in the application process or mock session in the interview process, because access to this type of apprenticeships is actually very different from the selection process is very different from the selection process from a university. But there should also be, or there could also be, intervention targeting firms so that they are actually open to hire different type of apprentices. So one possibility could be, I don't know, grants or tax reliefs if the hired apprentices are younger people or people from disadvantaged backgrounds, or even focusing on levy payers, regulate such that part of the levy fund is basically used for these type of apprentices, which, I mean, I'm not sure whether employers would be happy about, but it would be good if apprenticeship could actually be a tool to give opportunities also to those who are less academically able, but who can be great employees, to kind of reach higher places in their career and their labor market outcomes. And I stop here. I'd have other things to say, but I stopped here because I think I've already passed my 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chiara. John.
Thank you very much. So I want to add to the alphabet spaghetti for a moment, in that I'm also a board member of the Institute for Apprenticeships, which is the OFS's sort of sister regulator in the skills apprenticeship system. So I would start by saying thank you for the good relationship between the OFS and the Institute for Apprenticeships. And I think that's one of the really important bits actually of answering this question, is that the regulators and the system talks to each other, and we don't end up in silos. Because for me, FE, HE, apprenticeships, they're all trying in many ways achieve exactly the same thing. They're trying to give people the best start in life, the best career, the best outcomes, and it's just a different route to it. So having that collaboration is brilliant. The 3 points I would like to make, I suppose, in order to answer this question, is first around careers advice, second around quality, and third around fair access. So on careers, obviously the big thing what UCAS does is careers advice, and we've been working with universities, colleges, independent training providers over the last few years to try and really properly integrate higher technical qualifications, apprenticeship, undergraduate, part-time, international students, all of it in one place, and trying to make it as joined up and as efficient as possible, both for the provider of, but also the recipient of. And we've done a huge amount of work in merging careers advice, because we know that even though there's a really good news story that about 50% of people who come to UCAS are interested in doing an apprenticeship or technical education, people aren't necessarily seeing it as prestigious or as easy to get to it. So by merging that careers advice and making sure that people do have all of the options in front of them from the age of 13, 14, 15 onwards is absolutely vital. The second point about quality, I think this is the most tangible change that I've seen over the last sort of 10 years in the system, that university has always been seen, undergraduate has always been seen as just the gold standard. We are blessed with world-class universities, and too often the apprenticeship side of it has been seen as something else, something almost like a sort of commiseration prize for people who haven't quite done well enough. And I think fundamentally that has shifted in the last 10 years. And seeing so many more parents, so many young people, so many adults seeing apprenticeships as a really prestigious route, and actually some of our best universities embracing apprenticeships in just the same way, I think has really fundamentally had a massive cultural change. But in order to answer this question and create the right environment, maintaining that focus on quality is really, really important. And if all of that good stuff I've just spoken about is there, the bad side is that dropout rates in apprenticeships and technical education are still too high. You look at the undergraduate routes, dropouts are, still too big, but very, very small. In some apprenticeships, the dropout is approaching 50%. So there is an area there of quality. And finally, just on fairness, the Sutton Trust did an amazing piece of research with UCAS, and the Sociability Commission has done the same bit of research, that because apprenticeships often, unless they're within a university, and 80% of apprenticeships are done roughly in an independent training provider, if they are in that kind of scenario, there aren't all the fair access plans that John so expertly puts together. There is not all of the same mechanisms there to make sure that access is fair. And the Sociability Commission research and Sutton Trust research has found that some really prestigious apprenticeships, especially at degree level, are now harder to get into and more privileged than Oxbridge can be. So there is an element there. The system just needs to mature, and it needs to build up to the same that the universities and the fair access plans have. The other bit of fair access to apprenticeships that I would talk about is where I started. The good news story at UCAS is that 50% of people are interested in doing apprenticeships. That's 400,000 people a year. We aggregate apprenticeships from all 4 nations, from the government systems, from the employers we talk to, universities and colleges, and we still only have about 5,000 apprenticeships on UCAS at one time or another. So there is a massive mismatch between the demand, which is dramatically increased, and actual supply. And the apprenticeship levy has done a very good job in doubling the amount of funding for apprenticeships, but it's just nowhere near enough. So for me, there is a big question, is what I would like to end on, is how do we get more money into apprenticeships, more money into the technical education? Because that is, for me and UCAS, the biggest blocker in order to make the system as fair, as quality, and as easy to access as possible.
Thank you, John. Mandy.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. Just to remind you who UVAC is, really. So UVAC has been around for almost 25 years, and we have been championing higher level technical learning and to support higher education institutions to deliver those skills programs that the economy needs for some time. So I'm absolutely on the right panel, sitting in the right chair. And I'm going to pretend that you are the new government. Sorry, Robert, but I'm going to be addressing you as the new skills minister in terms of what UVAC would say as being the 9 asks of a new government to enable that environment to support technical higher education. And the first really is to do a better job actually identifying the skills gaps and shortages that are holding UK PLC back. And I think a clearer national picture is needed to the skills UK will require. And I think the IF8, another acronym, as John has said, I think is in probably a very good position to do just that, given that they do manage the development of those occupational standards for over 690 occupations from level 2 to level 7, and they underpin our technical education system. I think something which we kind of hinted at in this morning's earlier panel, which is around actually investment. So I think there needs to be some debate around increasing the collective government, individual and employer investment in technical and professional education and training. And I think actually government should facilitate a national debate on how to increase overall investment in skills programs to raise productivity, if that is the purpose of our skills system. And I think the debate should really focus on the relative role and responsibilities of the state, individual employer in paying for vocational education and training. If you think about the lifelong learning entitlement, Ed talked about the greater need by certainly employers to have individuals undertake those shorter courses, those more modularized sort of programs. Well, actually, that falls on the individual to meet the cost of. So what is the skin in the game for those employers who want to have those skills actually delivered in their workplace? Thirdly, I think we need to look about supporting the development of skills provision that reflects the needs of the economy and the public sector. And the priority should be given to those provisions that actually meet skills gaps and shortages and that are more closely aligned with the current and future skills needs of the economy and public sector. And I think the role of the OFS as regulator alongside the Education and Skills Funding Agency, DfE and Ofsted should be to focus on how skills provision delivered reflects those skills needs. A lot of what we're talking about is around language and the development of a culture. I think fostering the development of a culture of lifelong learning that values learning at all levels and all ages is still really important. And I hate to say it, but Chiara, you kind of fell into the same trap of talking about too often the skills debate focusing on the needs to prioritise provision for young people rather than the older workforce, or focusing on those entering the workforce newly from schools and colleges, rather than having a focus on existing workforce and lower level skills needs, rather than looking at sort of higher level skills needs. I think all individuals can develop the skills needed at all levels, needed to raise performance and productivity, and attitudes to management provision, for example, typifies the current culture. It's one of our biggest determinants of low productivity, and yet we still have government insisting that we have too much management and leadership provision, particularly in apprenticeships. I think a really important point to make, actually, is that we still don't get the recognition for the role that universities play in delivering skills provision. So getting that recognition and acceptance that actually we have a very different skills system. Too often skills policy programs and provision are seen as synonymous with further education. And I think John's mention of the changed perception of the role of HE in the delivery of apprenticeships is really meaningful as part of that debate. Clearly, we've talked about inclusivity and access. Absolutely, those skills programs should actually support social mobility, social justice, and enhance workforce diversity. Insufficient focus is currently placed on social mobility that happens over the age of 24. Again, back to Chiara's points. Greater emphasis is needed on family background and progression to a profession or graduate occupation. We have too much emphasis, actually, on what an apprenticeship and a skills system should be because they're most overly concerned with young people's opportunities. I think my final point would be that to ensure that all funds raised through the apprenticeship levy are spent on apprenticeships and that any surplus are retained to be spent on future apprenticeships or related higher technical training programs. We need to support greater flexibility in HE provision and delivery. Clearly, the LLE and the HTQ developments represent a significant and welcome development. New approaches to develop shorter credit bearing provision needs to be developed, absolutely, as do approaches to credit transfer and recognition. And I think we need a national debate around the role of credit in our future skills system. And I think finally, my plea would be to focus on evolution and not revolution. I think technical education, professional education and skills has been plagued by short-termism, continual change and lack of stability. I like the fact that actually under this government we have had some settlement around the value, particularly of higher degree apprenticeships, but actually new governments tend to make wholesale replacement changes. So I would caution against doing that. So I think my final plea would be that actually to secure the future for higher technical education delivered by universities and HEIs, we need to get the language right. We don't need to bifurcate the system as being academic over here, technical and vocational over here, or that we've got academic or vocational learners. Look at what we've done in apprenticeships. They're not technical or academic, they're both. They are required, there are a requirement at every level for a greater level of knowledge and underpinning of knowledge and behaviours. So we've raised the expectations around what achievement looks like in technical, vocational, professional education and skills.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Lewis.
Thanks very much, and great to be here. And so I'm Director of the Independent Commission on the College of the Future. We're a UK-wide commission looking at the role of colleges, working with universities and others in meeting the big challenges that we face. And I'm also Director of Public Affairs and Campaigns at the Association of Colleges, representing colleges in England. I want to make three simple points. The first point is we know very well that we have a big gap in terms of higher technical provision in England, and a whole raft of reports and reviews have made this case very clearly. I was rereading the Augur chapter on it that Edward and Alison, who's going to be speaking in a bit, made a very, very clear case that we've got a gap here that we need to address. Go back to Deering, we had a very clear recognition that there's a massive gap. So, and we compare very poorly to other similar nations when it comes to this, and that's only going to accelerate with changes in the world and work. So this is a big gap that we need to address, first point. Second point is we have a failure of the market addressing this gap. We have an example of market failure that we need to address. And the market failure is on the demand side and the supply side, and that came out in the earlier session. We need to support employers to understand the need to look at higher technical degrees, qualifications rather than necessarily degrees, so there's supporting there. And there's a huge piece of work that the panel have been talking about in terms of driving up demand from people to look at these qualifications. So there's a challenge there, but also on the supply side, the highly competitive, and that risks only accelerating, and I'll talk about that a bit more, system just isn't delivering locally. So colleges who traditionally have delivered a huge amount of this provision and commonly do so in other systems, so in Scotland, 30% of HE delivered in colleges, and that's very much their space. In Canada, similarly, in lots of other successful systems. Colleges just don't have the confidence, the investment, to make the long-term scaling up that's going to be required in higher technical provision. So the market isn't delivering for anyone at a local level. So final point is we need market intervention to look at this, and I want to draw out just 5 very brief examples where I think we need to be much more assertive about how we address that. Firstly, and it's a point we commonly make, we have no national education and skills strategy. So we don't set out anywhere what we need from the education and skills system, and we have no body looking across government, across the whole raft of different public policy challenges we face to say this is what we need. And if we did have one, top of the list or very high up the list would be that we have a big gap in higher technical provision that we need to address, and much more assertive about what we need institutions to do to address that. Second point then is around local skills, and Edward talked about that. We've got local skills improvement plans, a lot of energy gone into making them work. We really need to look at how we have a better balance of voices as part of local skills improvement plans, so that we're challenging employers to think about things that might not be on their immediate list of priorities, but they need to be thinking about longer term. Higher technical skills would be very much there. And we need to think about how we have local skills improvement plans as a much stronger partnership between colleges, universities, and others. And at the moment, there's a lot of work to do on that. Third point, and this is where you get into really thinking about how the market operates at a local level, I think we really need to be much clearer about the expectations of colleges and universities working together, and we had a really good discussion on that earlier, I thought. I think we should be looking at much more robust expectations on collaboration. And as an example, in emergency services, the Policing and Crime Act in 2017 set a duty on emergency services to collaborate where it drives up quality, efficiency and effectiveness of the service. And just when you look at that, there were lots of areas where for example, mental health support was an issue that was affecting all of the different emergency services, but it was nobody's obvious core business. And what's happened in lots of local places is people saying, here's a gap that we need to address. How can we invest together in this? How do we drive demand? How do we develop more coherent services? Who's leading on what? And that, I think, is the kind of mature conversation that we need to be having locally and regionally and indeed nationally to think about the respective complementary roles of providers to drive up what is, as I say, a market failure at the moment. So I think we really do need to get into that, and I think that does involve the conversation that Edward picked up on, thinking about the taxonomy of who's doing what. I think colleges have a natural leadership role here, working with universities, and I think there has to be local specificity and context applied there. Fourth point is addressing that learner and employer demand. So we do need to look at the careers information advice and guidance system and how that's much more coherent locally and nationally, but also supporting join up with other services. And we do need to look at investing in supporting employers to understand what they need from the skills system. And the fifth point is then, of course, we're at an OFS conference thinking about the regulatory environment. So how do we make sure that the regulatory environment in which colleges and smaller providers operate doesn't impede or undermine engagement with the HE side of their work? So I suppose there's five areas where I need to think about concluding point would be none of this is going to be easy. So thinking about partnerships, thinking about doing things differently is hard in any context. Thinking about the system good alongside your institutional hat is hard in any context. Partnership is hard. It's even harder in a context where you've had 13 years of funding cuts for the further education sector and real pressures on the university sector in terms of funding too. So there's a real risk in all of this that we do have a survival of the fittest bun fight. I think there's a real risk we see that with the LLE. And I think we do really need to rise above that and think about how can we work have these difficult conversations about partnership and think how we can come together much more coherently. And that's going to be the only way actually that we make a compelling case to any future chancellor for investment in the whole of the tertiary system, because we've really got our act together in terms of how we're going to work together and address all of these big challenges that I've spoken to. So I'll stop there and thanks very much.
No, thank you very much, Liz. So Jack, you've heard all of the problems. How is OFS going to solve all of them?
Thanks, John. Ever the easy intro.
Yeah.
So we have been thinking about our role in this technical education space, and I would start, and I think beautiful segue from Lewis, because it's really helpful that whenever you talk about growth in technical education, a major feature of providers' responses is about regulation. It's about regulation and overlap. And it's about the clarity and transparency that providers have. And with our other hat on at the OFS, it's also about funding. And those same features of clarity and transparency and predictability are there. So when we think about the work that the OFS needs to do, we think about both regulation and funding, and we think about clarity and predictability. So we expect that our job over the next 5 to 10 years is enabling those decision makers in colleges, in universities, in private providers to understand what it means to start delivering more technical education. So how do you get more supply? You get those decision makers to say, yes, I'm going to invest my time and energy in delivering a different kind of program than the ones that I'm delivering now. So in regulatory terms, you can see that we're starting to have those conversations with the sector on LLE through our call for student outcomes. We're talking about how we're going to regulate HTQs through our student outcome regulation measures. And the idea is that we set that out in advance, that colleges, universities, private providers can all see that's what's going to happen if I deliver these courses, and they can be certain of the way in which we'll regulate. And then the same thing applies to our funding. How do you know that it's worth investing your time and energy in developing these courses? And I would say that, Andy mentioned changes in government. I think this is an area where you've probably all got pilot fatigue. The idea that the solution to this problem is another £10 million applied in a very particular way over a short period of time. So one of the things that we're focusing on as we look at our funding arrangements is trying to provide as much kind of foresight of where the funding arrangement is going to go. Some of that isn't in our gift. Some of that is we get an annual settlement from government, so there is obviously some unpredictability there. But you can see in our latest degree apprenticeship fund that we've done what we can to set out actually 2 years worth of funding rather than 1 year. And we know that we need to go further, and we'll do what we can. But the aim of that is to give predictability and certainty. As we come to look at our funding methodologies in the future, whether it's right that you use kind of those accelerator programs, or whether you need to build in the kinds of course-based supplements that we have in other areas, are the questions we'll want to ask ourselves. And in coming to conclusions around how we regulate those things and how we fund those things, we know it's really important that we listen to the sector's views on how that happens. So in that collection of agencies who are working in this space, we see it as our job to talk with them. So we regularly speak with IFE and Ofsted and the ESFA and Ofqual and all the others, but also to talk to you about what that means for you. So if you're starting down the path of doing degree apprenticeships and Ofsted are coming to inspect you, what does that mean for your OFS regulation? And being really clear about what that will mean for you going forward. So those features of clarity and predictability are what we're seeking to do to contribute towards the conducive environment for enabling technical education. And the same thing sits in funding. We're not sitting here with all of the levers in our control, but we are committed to the OFS to do what we can in this space to be as clear and predictable as possible.
Thank you very much, Jack. So you've heard our opening set of contributions. I'd now like to open the floor for questions. We'll try and take questions in bunches of 3. We'll maybe take 2 from the room and then 1 online. So if Al's ready for that at the back. I should say in my thing it says Al as though it's AI, which made me think that we were going to get AI questions. Apparently, we're not doing that for very sensible reasons. So if we could start here. If you could just say your name and institution as you start.
Thank you, panel. I'm Ginny Page from the Gatsby Charitable Foundation, and I thought I'd say a couple of positive things. I think we've had a bit of negativity in terms of partnerships. We have been working closely with the Institutes of Technology, who you will know are partnerships between FE colleges, universities and employers. They're a relatively new range of partnerships focusing on STEM higher technical education, and there's a lot of potential within that group going forward. Career guidance, the Gatsby benchmarks for career guidance, we've just been reviewing. We've had them for nearly 10 years, reviewing and looking at the next 10. We've got a huge amount of positivity from schools and colleges about the impact of those benchmarks. So I thought I'd bring a bit of positivity to the room. My question, and I think it's been touched on a number of times, particularly by Lewis, is about regional issues. I'm wondering what additional money or powers that you would give to LEPs or combined authorities to support technical higher education in the regions better.
Thank you very much. Another question, please. One from this side of the room. Sorry, Shana.
Thank you. Joy Elliott-Bowman from Independent Higher Education. I've gone to pick up quickly on John's point about 50% of apprenticeships, apprentices not completing their courses, and this is part of my, what I think, and I'm wondering how we do to create that environment for technical higher education. We asked our members about this dropout rate. The number one reason was actually the evolution of work. It was that students are starting an apprenticeship, and midway through that apprenticeship, they're changing job, and the original apprenticeship is no longer applicable. And the work that it takes to switch to a new apprenticeship is so challenging that they leave the apprenticeship but continue that new job. They switch employer, and again, this changing nature of work. It's more common for people to switch employers in that early career stage, whether they're shifting careers or starting a new one. So in terms of supporting technical higher education, what I wanted to know from the panel is, what are the things that need to change? What are the barriers to actually supporting more flexibility and more transfer between the various models of technical higher education? Because I agree that we call it academic sometimes when actually it's just as technical as it would be in HTQ. It just happens to fall under a degree model. So we've got apprenticeships, we've got these higher technical qualifications, we've got qualifications on level 4 and 5 of the RQF. We have level 4, 5 and 6 on the FHEQ, including degrees, foundation degrees as well. How do we make it so that students can switch between these models? If they leave a job that has an apprenticeship, they can switch into an HTQ or a technical qualification and take something with them. How do we make it? What are the barriers? What do we need to change to create flexibility between all of these different types of technical higher education that allows students to complete the qualification they need and want as their job and their career changes pace?
Thanks very much, Joy. And Al, do you want to give us one from the back?
Thank you. Panel has made lots of suggestions about creating an enabling environment, but if you could make just one change to the regulatory or funding environment to support growth in higher technical education, what would it be?
Thank you very much. So we've got questions about the powers that various regional entities might have, consideration of how higher technical vocational training matches to the increasing flex of the labour market, and what regulatory change we would most make. I'll go backwards through the panel in the order they came. So, Jack, what regulatory change would you make to the regulator that we both work for? and indeed any other part of those questions.
So let's go outside of the one that we work for and then internally. So I think that, so Joy, you talked about the overlapping regimes, and one of the the great beauties of English higher education is its diversity. You solve the problem you described by having a national curriculum for HE, and that is not the thing that we want. So what I think that you need to move towards is the sector having that conversation in ways that make sense for it. So, and what I mean by that, and Mandy and I were having this conversation in LLE discussion the other day, that actually if a student takes a modular, a 30-credit module, in an environment where they're encouraged to credit transfer, actually they need to know that they can take that and go somewhere else, and that's true for all of those qualifications. And actually, at this point in time, I don't think that you would be guaranteed of being able to do that. And colleagues in colleges would tell you that their students would find it quite hard to go into university sometimes, and vice versa. But actually, the connections that need to be made between institutions in London look very different to the connections that need to be made in Cumbria. And trying to apply a national piece of regulation to resolve those issues, I think, is difficult. And that's why I think it's really important to connect to the point that was made about, that Ginny made about LEPs, that we need to, as far as we can, provide flexibility for geographical regions that make sense in themselves to resolve some of those issues. Because I don't think you're going to have a national higher education credit transfer system in time for the launch of LLE in 2025. But actually, I do think, and I'm certain that Ed would tell you in Nottingham, that there's sensible conversations to be had at city and regional basis about how those things operate in your areas. And it's those conversations that are critically important. So I would, in terms of a regulatory change, I think that a way of enabling or requiring, depending on your persuasion, cooperation at that regional level is really important. I'm old enough to remember working with people who worked in government offices in education departments, and they weren't brilliant all of the time, but actually one of the things that they did do was bring those people together in the right place.
Thank you, Jack. All three questions answered seamlessly there. There's some top-notch panelling there, so high bar for everyone else. Lewis.
Thanks. Well, I'll try similarly, starting with the point at the back. So what one ask would I do? And then I'd turn, I think Matt Weston at your conference 2 weeks ago, I think made the point, argued that if in government he'd do a review of the approach of regulation and funding across the tertiary system. And I think that would be an eminently sensible thing to do, to look at coherence across the system. And I think in terms of the question at the back then, that's the one change, is moving towards a much more joined up systemic approach. I think that has to start with some national body, and I think that has to start with a national strategy. On Ginny's point then, you then think about what does that look like at a regional level, and you're absolutely right to say there are real successes with IoTs. They have really strengthened really good local partnerships between institutions in exactly the train that we want to be. The evolution of them has to be, how do you embed that into the wider system? So are IoTs really embedded into what's happening with LSIPs? Definitely not. Are they really embedded into coherent strategies that are happening at MTA level? Definitely not. So I think it's that join up and that bedding in that has to be part of the picture, which then speaks to the point, and we'll have a report out in the new year making the case for evolution of LSIPs, and that has to be about it being one plan, not one of many. I think you do need a kind of bringing it all together. It doesn't make sense for Andy Burnham to have a plan here and the LSIP to have another plan there at all. One plan embedded into the devolution agenda. And it has to involve a duty, and that's why I said that duty to collaborate, a duty on providers in a mature way to come together and saying, what are we doing collectively to respond to this? And who's doing what? And where are the areas where we need to take some risk? And who's going to lead on that? Because if we leave it to the market there, either nobody will take the risk or we'll continue to compete in a very unproductive way. So I think much more pressure on that. And similarly echo the point then in terms of Joy's question then, trying to have a really coherent approach to transfer at national level, not possible, but looking at the Scottish model, articulation agreements at a regional level can work really well. And I'd absolutely be doing that local, regional, within the context of an LSIP geography, I think.
Thanks, Lewis. Mandy.
Oh, thanks, John. I was going to say, come to me last. I'll start with the last question, actually, around one small change to higher technical education, because it does speak to, I think, what we do need, which is a national debate around a national mechanism for the recognition of credit, translation and transfer, because it's not enough to have an inconsistent approach by provider by provider. And in apprenticeships, of course, there is a more consistent approach because the funding rules require every institution to take into consider prior learning or experience. So I think we do need, that national debate, if not that national change. And UVAC, in its consultation response to the early consultation on the LLE, said, why are we not having more of a discussion about it? I think if I was going to tag anything else onto that, which would be my point around actually a more healthy discussion about who contributes to the cost of training. And I think that, again, those two conversations do need to happen. Jean, your question about, what further monies or powers we could devolve, I'm not sure, actually, whether or not I could answer that easily. I think potentially, have we exhausted the devolution debate? I think the regional aspect is absolutely critical, but let's not forget about national skills shortages and the requirements to plan more effectively at a national level. I think actually it's about whether or not those combined authorities, those local plans can actually, have more effect when it comes to accountability. Because if you think about the combination of providers in any locality, it's a very different picture. It's not about just localism. Your universities have an international profile, as do increasingly independent training providers have a much more national profile, as do FE colleges, if you think about the way in which they're now grouped. But I think actually, as I've been a National Skills Commissioner before, looking at a skills blueprint, I think it is about actually getting a better sense of the change that's happened. All too often, and I've said it again and again, we still talk about our system. That's almost like going back to the 1970s. And I think we just need a reconceptualization about what we're wanting from our combination of universities and colleges and every other type of deliverer, including employer providers. So let's just recalibrate. Even in the early design of the Advanced British Standard, we've got the IF8 talking about academic pathways and vocational pathways. Okay, and I think, well, we're talking about choices here. How did I go from being a history graduate to being the chief executive, the most authoritative voice on higher and degree apprenticeships? It wasn't a linear process, a big chunk in government, I would say, but actually we just need to be a little bit more outward thinking and open-minded. Joy, your question around the race at which we don't have completions in apprenticeships, massive programme issue. Fewer than 1 in 2 complete their apprenticeship. Lots of reasons, and there are some positive reasons within that. You talked about the evolution of the workplace. The fact that some of our apprenticeship programmes are 6 years long, for example. Rapid change in that period is likely to happen. It speaks again to how we do recognise those stepping off points. The design principle for the apprenticeship reforms was it's all about the completion of the apprenticeship. The apprenticeship is what we're looking to gain esteem around. This is not about actually getting a level 5 or a level 4 qualification because you decided to step away from your training programme. But maybe there is something there that actually talks about the flexibility. So I think actually some of that transfer, that recognition of the value of what's being gained through a work-based training programme, I think is where, again, speaks to how we look at credit and how we translate the value of that learning.
Thanks very much, Mandy. Although, of course, the correct answer to your question is that it's because history graduates are awesome and better than other people. John.
Thank you, John. First, just to Ginny's question, and thank you ever so much for everything the Gatsby Foundation does. The Gatsby benchmarks have been transformative, and I think they've had an enormous impact on careers advice, to the point where we have aligned a lot of our careers advice to them. So thank you ever so much for that. On the regionalism question, it's a really difficult one because you don't want to create a postcode lottery and you don't want to create fragmentation. And I was brought up in Grimsby, and
Me too. You, John.
Exactly. So put aside history graduates, it's people from Grimsby that really make things run. The problem with that, when it comes to technical apprenticeships, is that the local labour market decides your opportunities. not in the way that higher education tends not to. And therefore, if I wanted to stay in Grimsby and I wanted to do an apprenticeship or technical education, I'd have to look at the local labour market and try and find something. And now if fishing was what I wanted to do in my career, I'm in luck. If it isn't, then I'm not in luck. So there is an issue with technical and apprenticeships that the local labour market can be quite constricting. Not so when you're in a big city, when there is a really diverse labour market, but when you're in more rural areas. So my encouragement, I suppose, on the regionalism agenda is that I worry about mayors and combined authorities creating fragmentation, trying to create their own qualifications, their own systems, their own stuff, because it drives employers mad, it drives applicants mad, and actually a lot more energy focused on helping filling gaps in certain subjects, helping SMEs, which most struggle with a lot of this system, for me feels like the most sort of value add in the regionalism agenda. Thank you, Joy, for your question, and of course all your members. I always think they're some of the most innovative and exciting members in the system, so a lot of all the good ideas that we're talking about today often come from them, so thank you ever so much for that. On the dropout rates, you're absolutely right that a lot of the reasons for those dropout rates are incredibly legitimate. And at the Institute for Apprenticeships, we have T-level students and apprentices coming into every single board meeting, and we talk to them, we ask about their experience. And so many of those dropout rates are because they are offered a job. The employer says, I want to employ you. And they go, well, I'd be mad to say no to that. So they fall out of their apprenticeship because they've got what they want, or their family circumstances change, or they want a shift or whatever. So there are some really legitimate reasons for dropout rates. But there is a problem in the system that too many people still are turning up to do apprenticeships and not realising that they're an apprentice and that it's been missold to them, and that they get there and the experience is much more different than they're expecting, or they don't see the value in that endpoint assessment, in that qualification. And that's where at UCAS we do a huge amount of work around city guides, employer profiles, employer guides. Employers are now at our physical events and things like that, so that people can actually meet the employer, understand what experience they're going to have, so when they turn up, it's not a surprise, and lots of the bad reasons for dropouts are addressed. And then finally, on the last question, I'm going to take John's challenge about top-notch panelling, and I'm going to create some disagreement on the panel. I'm not sure we want a top-down government strategy for skills. I don't think we want more government money put into programmes with lots of bureaucracy around it. I don't think we want a big debate, another review. I just simply don't think we want that. I think we want to unleash the system. You know, there needs to be proper standards in place, proper quality controls, and the OFS regulating, Institute for Apprenticeship regulating. We need more money in the hands of employers so they can put on more provision. So actually, I don't think we want a top-down approach to this. So my answer to the final question about how do you achieve that, the Chancellor in the autumn statement announced full expensing for capital investment. I think there is a potential there to apply this, the skills agenda. The idea that if you spend all of your apprenticeship levy, you have access to skills tax credits, skills full expensing, whatever you want to call it, and employers, if they spend more than their levy, they can deduct that skills expenditure from their corporation tax or whatever tax you want to do it. So what you create there is an incentive in the system for employers to spend, which then allows colleges and universities to do what they do well, put on really good provision, and attract that funding.
Thank you very much, John. Disagreement and a solid policy proposal as well. Very exciting. Chiara, can I ask you to come back on the question?
Yeah. Yes. So, on the question about what would be kind of a big, the one ask to support the to enable the environment for technical education. So it will be, I mean, although things have improved a lot, and there have been a lot of, I mean, in the last 10 years, there have been a lot of kind of policy changes that have increased and improved the quality of apprenticeships. It would be, I mean, if I could ask something, would be to do in sort that there are even more quality checks, especially in apprenticeships where 80% of basically of the course, of the curriculum is done on the job. There might be a lot of heterogeneity in the experience of different learners. And this might also contribute to the basically, I mean, to the stigma that in some kind vocational education has versus academic education. So if it could, I mean, if quality checks could be improved, and if there was a way to make sure that there is a minimum level of quality throughout all different level of employers. So from bigger firms where which have a better infrastructure, mentoring systems put on to smaller firms. I think that would be a great advancement also for how people see vocational education, technical education. Yes, in terms of exactly on the question about dropouts, as someone was also mentioning, dropouts I think are a major issues, especially for progression, in the sense that if one does not achieve a given level, for example, of apprenticeships, then they cannot, progress to the next level. And this might be, this is an issue. And someone was suggesting before transferability or recognizability of credits. For example, in other countries, like Switzerland, it is possible to change employers, but to remain on the same type of apprenticeship. And I think that, as someone was also mentioning, dropouts are not necessarily all the time kind of negative, in the sense that I remember a research done in Scotland where they were suggesting that dropouts are higher in some specific type of apprenticeships, and which are the apprenticeships like in the sector, for example, of hospitality, or apprenticeships that where people would learn the basic skills and then they would be offered a job. And I think as well that a possible issues or a possible difference when we compare it to other countries is due to the fact that, so in other countries, like I'm thinking about Germany, Switzerland, apprenticeships are seen as a training. So are seen as an education tool. Whereas in England, yes, they are a training tool, but they are also considered as an employment. So, in this set of thinking, this way of thinking, obviously, if I'm getting a proper offer of employment, then I would stop my apprenticeship to get the job. So it is also, I think, a different way of considering the apprenticeship with respect to other countries that might actually also lead to these higher dropout rates, which I think are mainly an issue if we want to see apprenticeships as a way to progress in your career from one level to another and to be able to get to higher level places. Yes, the last question was, I think, about regional level. So whether to basically increase devolution or to increase the powers of local areas in terms of this kind of policies. And as someone mentioned, as well, the fact that the local labor market are very, obviously might be very diverse, might be very heterogeneous across the country, creates the fact that the regional entities on one side might be more able to respond to the local needs. Although this is, for example, we had a study on the effect of devolving the apprenticeship grant for employers on the number of starts of apprenticeships. So basically, the effect of devolution of that part of the apprenticeship budget, and that the study suggested that there was no for example, impact on the number. It didn't increase the number of startup apprenticeships. And the disadvantage or the negative side to devolving, if I could say, is that we would add again an additional layer that could make it more difficult again to create a similar level of quality of the provisions for everyone.
Okay, Chiara, I'm going to draw you to close there because we are, I'm afraid, actually at time. So thank you all very much. And I know there are more questions in the audience, and I'm sure you can see the panelists. Don't let them leave until you've asked them any questions you want over tea. But thank you all very much for joining us today. I think I've been asked to sort of sum up, and I don't want to take up too much time to do it, but I just think what strikes me here is that we are, my predecessor, Chris Millwood, recently brought out the results of a panel discussion over the potential emergence of a tertiary system in the English education system. And I think what's clear here is that we're not heading towards a tertiary system, we are in a tertiary system. The question now is what we do with it and how we manage it and how we structure it. But I think, as Chiara pointed out there, there's also genuine barriers to how we balance that, the needs of a regional focus and of a devolved focus with that sort of consistent quality work. And of course the OFS is, that's our business, and we will continue to engage in this conversation into the future. So thank you all very much to our panel. Thank you very much. I'll take them the usual way. So we move now to our final keynote, and I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Baroness Wolff of Dulwich to talk to us. She comes. I think particularly, not simply for her extraordinary expertise in this area, but also one of the things that I have spent a lot of time doing in my role as Director for Fair Access is talking to the higher education sector we regulate is a knowledge creating, curating and communicating sector. And one of the things that's unusual, I think, about the equality work is that too often the sector hasn't turned its powers of analysis and innovation in enough to do the evaluation work that it needs to do to drive its quality strongly enough. But it's also, I think, the case that sometimes too often the sector doesn't turn outward enough and share its expertise and brilliance with the wider political and policy world. And certainly no one can say that of Alison. She's been a linchpin of these discussions over many years, and I think is, as well as her own expertise, an excellent example of the power and importance of the higher education sector to our wider national political and economic discussions, and I'm delighted to welcome her today. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Don. Well, it's not quite the graveyard shift because it's only lunchtime, but I am very conscious that I'm coming in at the end of a long morning where I have not heard everything and therefore obviously risk repeating or contradicting something on which everybody has reached agreement. But I thought it might be worth finishing the session by going back to the overall title. You know, why are we here? Why do we actually think we need to worry about technical higher education? So not just the details of how we should do it, but you know, why do we think that there is something that needs to be fixed, something that is worth worrying away at? And so I want to say a little bit about that, and then maybe add a couple of things, hopefully, to what you're likely to have heard already. There are sort of three things, I think, which keep coming up in the worlds that I live in. First of all, there is this, we've got to do something, not enough people are doing level 4 and 5. Got to have more 4 and 5. A second thing is, we've got concrete shortages. There are too few of this, too few of that, too few of something else. Subtext, technical higher education is the answer. The third thing, and the third reason we do come back to this, is one which I think people are a little nervous of expressing very clearly, although I would agree with what, for example, the previous panelists said about this, in terms of local labour markets, which is bluntly apprenticeships are not delivering. And in the short term, it's not clear to me that apprenticeships can or will deliver all that we need on higher technical. In 2021 to 2022, for example, only 20% of apprenticeship starts and 20% of completions, which is obviously a much lower number, were in occupations which were skilled worker shortages. And in terms of numbers, and you just think of the number of people there are in the higher education system or the size of the workforce, what you were actually getting was about 24,000 completions in areas which were identified as shortage skilled workers. So those are the three things that sort of float around and feed into each other. But I think it's worth unpacking them a little bit and asking if they really justify going, we've got to get more higher technical into higher education. We've got to. I mean, I believe we should, but I think it's also very valuable to ask, you know, is that just because I'm somebody who's been bashing away at this for so long that I've been institutionalized? So the first is no 4s and 5s. Well, I agree, this is a real signal that something is happening. Not just because we have lower levels of 4 and 5 qualifications, people following those sorts of courses in higher education, but also because we can see that there has been a long-standing and continuing decline. And we also understand a little bit about this and about the fact that it has happened much less because of labour market signals and much more because of funding systems which give institutions a strong incentive to steer people towards degrees and have up till now also given individual students a very strong incentive to go towards 3 or even 4-year degrees. So clearly there is something going on, and that too few 4 and 5 thing is a danger signal, but maybe we should count it as a blessing in disguise, and maybe moving to a situation in which we substitute graduates, full graduates from more general degrees for things which are more highly technical would be a good idea. I mean, that's in practice what we have been doing in this country. We've been substituting graduates more or less effectively. The second thing we talk about is concrete shortages. Well, I think that stands as a real reason to worry. The policy response has been, we'll import. That's less and less feasible or desirable. It was never very desirable. But that I think I would take as a real sign that higher technical is an issue to think about. The third thing is apprenticeship and whether or not that can be the solution. And obviously, some apprenticeship is called degree apprenticeships, but more generally, if you are doing apprenticeships which are at the higher technical end, people who are doing them have to be trained. They have to have off-the-job training, they have to have specialist training. And the place for that in our system is, alas, but I think for the foreseeable future, not going to be in specialist vocational schools, not going to be in our FE colleges, is going to have to be on our universities. Now, up to now, this conversation has been dominated by degree apprenticeships, which are not delivering what most of us describe or think of as higher technical. For example, in the level 7s, the overwhelming proportion are not just senior leadership, but business admin law, same at level 6. This is not a high growth area for anything that I think we would describe as higher technical. But even aside from that, if we are going to grow higher technical education, whether it's through direct study in universities or whether it's through apprenticeships, universities have got to play a role, and apprenticeship is not on its own going to deliver the skills that we need. So if we accept that there are concrete shortages, then I think we also have to accept that we have to find a way to make it easier and more attractive for companies to come to universities for training and for universities to get more involved in that type of education. And as I said, I do not see this changing. I don't see, alas, any immediate change to the chronic underfunding of further education. After several years in and out of government, we're entering a phase where basically the only way you get money for something is by taking it from something else. When it comes to the hard decisions at the beginning of a spending round, there is not going to be a sea change, which means the Treasury suddenly goes, oh, forget, I know you're screaming about schools, and I know you're screaming about childcare, and I know you're screaming about universities, but we are going to fund further education. No, they're not. So universities have actually got to step up. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be also doing something about further education, but it's not suddenly going to come out of left field and take this over. But I also think it's worth looking at it slightly differently. Not just the concrete shortages, but also the future. Because actually we are right to worry about higher technical education, because in fact we have an interesting and growing body of knowledge, which in a way fits with our intuitions. Having technicians, having highly qualified staff in companies is good for productivity. The best research on this actually uses French data sets, which are fantastically detailed. And what they show is that there is a really quite remarkable, almost certainly causal relationship between companies employing a significant number of technically qualified staff and their future productivity growth. And it's not just a correlation which says, oh, well, they're productive companies, so they employ technicians. It's that companies that employ technicians, and that includes very much ICT, it's not just engineering, are far more likely than those which employ fewer or none to have high productivity growth over the next decade. So our hunch that graduates will do, the idea that we could just go on substituting with graduates at one end and other people just leaving with a level 3 at best, and that's their lot. This is not a good strategy. It's absolutely not a good strategy for this country, and we should recognize that one really important reason to take higher technical education seriously is that if we are serious about growth, and without growth we can't do anything important, we have got to think seriously about productivity, and technical skills and technician employees are fundamental to that. And I repeat, this is not just in manufacturing. So I think the underlying arguments for taking this seriously are actually stronger than we sometimes realize, and that we don't make them always in the right way, partly because we tend to go, oh, there are level 4s in Germany, and that's all very well, but the German economy is very different. Or we basically duck the apprenticeship dilemma and don't recognize that, certainly for the foreseeable future, it is not going to deliver all the technical skills that we need. To the degree that it does, it's got to make it easier for universities to get involved. But that also, as I think one of the Johns said, the local labour market is not just automatically going to generate for everybody the training that is required. And no SME can create a complex apprenticeship program for itself. So that's where I think we should hold on to. This really matters, and we have to not just ask, how do we tweak the existing programs? We need to think harder about how to do it. So what are our priorities? I think there are 3 things that one has to worry about: finance, incentives, and quality. The LLE provides us potentially with the financial underpinning for some of this, for a lot of it. It doesn't do it all on its own, but it makes it possible in a way that it wasn't before. And I think that for it to do that, you don't need lots more changes. You certainly don't need to set up some universal credit transfer framework. I mean, honestly, that's, the number of individuals who are going to want to do 30 credits in Cumbria, followed by 60 credits in Exeter, followed by another 60 in, I don't know, Solihull. I mean, no. Let's have growth from below, which is actually how the United States works too. But we do need to realize that on its own, it won't necessarily transform things. We need incentives for both supply and demand. I am quite optimistic about the demand prospects. In Singapore, they recently gave everybody basically some cash and entitlement to go and do additional training. And what is interesting is that a third of the population have taken advantage of this. So I think if it's simple and if the supply is there, people will demand it. And so then the question becomes, how do we incentivize institutions to supply it? And that, I think, is something which is not something I'm going to take care of in half a minute up here, but I think that is going to be one of the major challenges. How many institutions will feel it's worth doing this? How many institutions will feel it's worth putting in the investment and taking the risks? And how many people will go, you know what, even at the current rate, I'd do better recruiting people to a foundation year? It's an open question. However, I do think that there is a third thing, which is about quality, and this is where I actually do want to make a very clear recommendation. I think that the quality has to be about a quality mark for institutions. I think there is a real danger that we will go down the track of having top-down, over-controlled growth in regulation related to a move towards a more flexible delivery system. I think it's a real, real danger, and it will do very little for high-quality technical education. The Department for Education loves developing qualifications. T-levels are its latest triumphant attempt. And I think there is a real risk of this. High-quality technical education is flexible. It's responsive to local labour markets. It recognises changes. That means it cannot be something which is slow, cumbersome, and where the quality depends on the belief in Whitehall that describing and defining a qualification delivers quality. It doesn't. The institution must be the quality mark, and if that means that there are new forms of quality that OFS or whoever starts to look at, well and good. But I do think that the higher education system is absolutely fundamental here because it can be responsive. It's in its DNA to be responsive. It is, of course, internationally looking as well. But higher education institutions are also local institutions. They respond to their local labour markets, and we're actually pretty good at putting on programs and then closing them down if it turns out that nobody wants them. So I think that we should not, as a higher education sector, be apologetic about this. We should be very clear that quality has to be demonstrated, but it has to be demonstrated at institutional level. We should be very clear that higher education is absolutely central to higher technical education. It should be absolutely clear that that is true for high-level apprenticeships as well as for freestanding degree courses. And the major challenge, it seems to me, is actually to the sector. Will it think it is worth it, and what would it do? What would it take to make the sector as a whole take this seriously and help to create the demand, which I'm pretty confident is there? Thank you.
I think I pass back to me now, if that's all right. Thank you, Alice. Well, I'll just come and sit up here. So I've written down several times in the course of your speech the word bracing.
Yeah,
so,
well, waking people up
yeah, no,
the morning was probably
yeah, I think that everyone. I'm going to use my exciting thing here. Let's see. I think that's yes. I think bracing is probably where I'm going to go with that. And I think what struck me out of that, I think, was two things that I think are really interesting. One is that the scale of the problem is absolutely real, and that level 4-5 piece is there. So we're not wrong to think about it, but that sometimes there's a desire in the education system to go policy shopping and pick up things from other nations as though that's going to provide the answer. And actually, the systems we have are the systems we have to use to do this. And I don't think that means that we accept that we can't change them and influence them, and obviously we are going to try and do that. But actually, a lot of the discussion today has been really powerfully about starting from where we are and how we move forward in that, and I think that's really important. And I think that's a really useful segue into my final comments here, which is that that's, I think, part of our role as the OFS is to help build the framework and the system by which the higher education sector, broadly defined, and that of course includes those parts of FE that provide HE, can undertake to tackle the challenges that Alison has laid out, and that we're not driving it through an assumption that there is a single correct answer that we somehow have access to and are just waiting for everyone else to follow into, but that we are realistic and open about an ongoing conversation with those we regulate about how best to do this, how we do our part, how they do theirs, where we need to incentivize, where we need to compel, and where we need to accept that some of the activities have either worked or not worked, and treat those things as learning activities. So I think that all feels very much of a part with, and it's a very positive conclusion for us in the sense of, I think, where we want to be now as a regulator who does hold our sector accountable, who does provide the challenge to that sector to do the work that needs to be done in students' interest, but also does that in a way in which there is a rich, fruitful and transparent engagement between us and those who regulate. So those online, those here, please do look out for announcements about the first round of the outcomes from our degree apprenticeship funding programme in January, which will be part of that conversation, and then later the work that Jack spoke to earlier about what we're already thinking about with the LLE. So there's plenty more practical conversations that we're going to be having the coming years, or the coming year. But I also think part of this wider conversation of just being aware of the scale of the challenge, but also that we have tools to hand that can help us solve that, and that will do if we move forward together in an open, transparent, and discursive way. So thank you again to all our panelists. Thank you to all the OFS colleagues who've organised our event today, and thanks to everyone online and indeed in the room for their contributions. Thank you very much, and that's the close.